Hello, my lovely anatomists and physiologists. Welcome back to another video on lymphatic system. We are ready to move more into the different defense mechanisms that we see in the body. And I'm combining information here that's presented in our OpenText text, which is linked in the video description, with an older version of a text published by Pearson. And when we think about our lymphatic system as providing defense, we're going to see that there's two sort of broad categories. And the first broad category that we're going to work with are the 7 innate, or we can call them non-specific defenses. When we say innate, what we're saying is these come along with you when you're born. So you have these. These are not dependent on being exposed to particular pathogens. These are just defenses that are automatically there from the first minute, right? When we say that these innate defenses are non-specific, that means they're equally well effective on any of the possible pathogens that we might encounter, meaning we don't care what virus it is. We don't care what parasite or fungus or bacterium it is. These defenses are going to be, to some extent, effective regardless, right? And that's going to be different from what we see when we look at what we can call adaptive or specific defenses, and that will be coming up in the future. So let's talk first about physical barrier. And here I think we should think about epithelial tissue. And we should think about this also in terms of like glandular secretions. When we talk about epithelial tissue, we are talking about the tissue that lines the body. So this includes your epidermis, right? The top layer of your skin is a nice protective barrier that's just preventing organisms from gaining access. Once we get into like the mouth, we still have epithelial tissue preventing pathogens from getting into our deeper tissues. But we also see, for instance, our saliva is going to include a lysozyme, which is an enzyme that's going to help digest bacterial cell walls. So that's pretty awesome. Let's write that in. Digest bacterial cell walls. We can also think about, okay, let's go a little deeper in the digestive tract. Let's go into the stomach. And in the stomach, we're going to be making hydrochloric acid. And this hydrochloric acid has a really low pH of about 2. And this is important in helping us digest our proteins, but also digest pathogens that maybe we have ingested. We also have some organisms that are present on and in our body. We can talk about these as our flora or our fauna. We can talk about them. Flora is usually talking about plant material. Fauna is usually talking about animal material. Our herbaceous flora, so I'm going to stay there. We don't necessarily have plants growing on or in our bodies, right? But we do have bacteria and we do have some fungi, and they're going to pretty much stake out a claim on the territory. So they're going to pretty much make sure that they get the place to live. And so they're going to be important also in helping to prevent kind of those other sorts of organisms from sort of taking up residence. Okay. So we see lots and lots of examples of physical barriers in the body. The next characteristic to look at is the phagocyte. And we talked about phagocytosis way back in chapter 3, where a phagocyte is an organism, a cell that does phagocytosis. And phagocytosis looks like bringing out your cell membrane, pinching around something and bringing it into the body. And so these cells can identify foreign cells. They don't know who they are, but just that they're not you. And they can engulf those and they bring them into their cell using what's called a phagosome. And so this is not an infection. The phagosome can fuse with a lysosome to help digest out that organism. So that's a way of actually eating pathogens and debris and that sort of thing. Now, your phagocytes are described as your first line of cellular defense. First line of cellular defense. And this includes your macrophage. We've talked about these so many times in this course. This includes your neutrophil. Notice these are all white blood cells, monocyte as well. When we talk about that macrophage, these are amoeboid in nature, which means that they are able to send out extensions of the cell and move in that direction. So they can actually move through your body. They're free to roam, so they can help kind of capture pathogens, capture debris if tissue's been damaged. The neutrophil is going to demonstrate that positive chemotaxis toward infected tissue. And if your tissue is infected, there's some cleanup that needs to be done, right? But also there could be some pathogens in that particular location. And then your monocyte is going to differentiate into the macrophage or the dendritic cell. So the monocyte differentiates into the macrophage or dendritic cell. And so we've mentioned dendritic cells before as being important defense cells. And what we're going to see is that these cells are going to be, all of these are going to be attracted to inflammation. Again, if you have inflammation, you have mast cells that are releasing histamine, you have tissue damage, you probably have some bacterial infection. And so you're bringing these cells to that particular location. The next non-specific defense to mention is called immunological surveillance. And this is an innate defense, but this involves a lymphocyte called the NK cell. And NK, remember, stands for natural killer. So this is a lymphocyte, but it's involved in this innate defense. And what we're going to see happening is that these cells ultimately are going to induce what's called apoptosis. Oh my goodness, y'all, this is one of my absolute favorite science words. Doesn't it sound like the most fun, exciting, like festival type of thing ever? Apoptosis. Okay, and what it really means is cell-directed death. Cell-directed death. So apoptosis is going to mean that the cell will kill itself. Okay. Now, what kind of cell wants to do this? This is happening if you have a viral infected cell and some of your cancer cells. So the NK cell is recognizing if you have a viral infected cell, or it can recognize some of your cancer cells. Now there's two different things that the NK cell can do. Number one, the NK cell can release what's called phospholigand. And the phospholigand is a chemical that's going to bind to the infected cell and trigger apoptosis. So cells can have genes that get activated that triggers the apoptosis to occur. The other mechanism here is your NK cell can release instead a chemical called perforin. And this one is going to perforate the cell membrane, not of the NK cell, but of the infected or cancerous cell. And then it's also going to release granzyme, which is a digesting enzyme. So what this is saying is the NK cell is releasing the perforin to poke holes in the cell membrane, and then also it's releasing granzyme to digest that cell from the inside. So instead of triggering apoptosis in this way, the granzyme is actually the thing that's killing the cell. Now let me stop here and talk about what is called pattern recognition receptors. And we can abbreviate this as PRR, pattern recognition receptors. And I'm going to do a star beside your immunological surveillance, and I'm going to do a star beside the phagocyte. How is it that these cells, the phagocytes and the NK cell, know which cells to target and attack if they're non-specific? Like, how are they knowing which cells belong and which cells don't belong? And what we're seeing is that there is a membrane bound receptor that's going to recognize characteristics of pathogens or stressed and damaged cells. So this is the tool that both of these groups of cells can use to actually recognize, okay, which cells need to have apoptosis, which cells can we phagocytize. And what we see is that in these cases, we're kind of getting by with a limited number of these receptors. And they give us access to a wide variety of pathogens. So again, this is the non-specific part of what the immunological surveillance and what the phagocytes are doing. So they're able to just sort of like generically recognize this cell is not functioning right. This cell is a pathogen. And so that is triggering the phagocytosis, or that's triggering the apoptosis activities. Let me stop here and continue our discussion of our 7 innate defenses in the next video. So we've covered 3 of the 4. As always, take care of yourselves and each other.